Part 2. The rain fell. The cacophony of the falling droplets rang in the ears. The streets of the royal capital had not been designed with drainage in mind, particularly the small alleys. In the end, the entire alley became a miniature lake. Splashes of water flew up as raindrops fell upon the water surface. The wind blew ripples through said splashes, and the scent of water was heavy in the air, making the royal capital feel as though it was submerged underwater. There was a boy in this world that had been dyed grey by the splashing of water. He lived in a run-down hovel. No, using the word hovel would be giving the location underserved praise. That building was supported by narrow beams as wide around as a man's forearm. A tatty piece of cloth substituted for a roof, and the edges which draped down served as walls. A boy of 6 lived in these conditions, which were little different from an open-air restaurant. He was curled up in a corner like a casually discarded piece of rubbish, lying on a thin cloth where he laid his head. When one thought about it, the wood supports in the tatty cloth that served as both roof and walls were most likely the fruit of this boy's hard work, like a child building a secret base. The sole merit of this house that was unworthy of the name was that he was not directly soaked by the rain. The endless deluge made the temperature sink like a stone, shrouding the boy in shiver-inducing cold. The condensation from his short, infrequent breaths were the only sign that he was alive, and as the weather stole their heat, they vanished into the air. The boy had been soaked by the frigid rain long before entering his home, and he was rapidly losing body heat. He had no way to stop his shivering. However, this bone-chilling cold soothed the bruises which covered his body. That was the only solace for him amidst these horrific conditions. The boy remained curled up on the ground as he looked out at the abandoned alley at the world. The only things he could hear were the sound of the rain and his own breathing. There was nothing else in the absence of those sounds, which made him think he was the only person left in the world. The boy was young, but he understood that he was going to die. He was not afraid of it because he was young, and did not fully understand the concept of death. In addition, he did not feel that there was any particular reason to continue living. He had been clinging to life all this time because he was afraid of pain and fled it. If he could die, right then and there, without feeling any pain, only the chill of the wind and the hunger gnawing at his belly, then death was hardly a bad thing. He slowly lost the feeling in his rain-soaked body, and his mind began to fade into a blur. He should have found a place to hide from the rain before it fell, but he had run afoul of several thugs and received a vicious beating. It was good enough that he had managed to return here. This was the sole morsel of joy he clung to. Did that mean that everything else was suffering? It was quite common for him to go 2 days without eating, so that was hardly misfortune. He had neither parents nor anyone to take care of him, and that was how it had always been, so that did not qualify as misery. His tattered clothes and their repulsive stench were a fact of life for him, so that was not a hardship for him. Eating rotten food and drinking dirty water to fill his belly was the only way of life he knew, so it did not count as suffering. But then, his hovel was sometimes taken by others, or destroyed by those who took pleasure in wrecking it, and he was also beaten up by drunken men so his entire body ached. Was that suffering, then? No, it was not. The boy suffered, yet he was blind to his own suffering. However, all this would soon be over. The misery of which he was blissfully ignorant would end here. Death came without distinction to the fortunate and the unfortunate alike. Yes, death was absolute. He closed his eyes. His body had long since stopped feeling the cold, and now he lacked even the strength to open his eyes. He could hear his own faint heartbeat in the darkness. The sound of the rain blended with it, but then he heard something strange intrude into this world of his. A voice drowned out the sound of the rain. Amidst the fleeting remnants of his consciousness, the boy forced open his eyes, drawn by that curiosity unique to children. It entered the narrow field of his vision. The boy's rapidly closing eyes widened. It was beautiful. For a moment, he had no idea what it was. The best description for it would be gem-like, or glittering like gold. Of course, someone like him who ate discarded, half-rotten food to survive the days could not think of such things. Yes, there was only one thing in his mind. Like the sun. That was the most distant, unattainable thing he could imagine. That word appeared in his mind. The rain had dyed the world grey. The sky was filled with thick black clouds. Perhaps the sun felt that nobody would notice, and so it had taken a walk and appeared before him. A thought like that ran through his mind. It reached out a hand to stroke his face. And so, the boy was originally not a human being. Nobody had treated the boy as a human being. But on this day, he became a human being. Third day of the lower fire, 9th month, 4:15. This was the royal capital of the Riestais kingdoms. The fortress Rolante stood at its heart, its grounds encircled by 400 meters of curtain walls with 20 huge towers spaced along its length. This room was located within one of those 20 towers. The lanterns were out in this none too spacious room, and there was a bed in there. A young man, somewhere between boyhood and adolescence, lay on the bed. His blonde hair was cropped very short and his skin was tanned and appeared healthy. Climb. He possessed only a name but no surname. He was a soldier who had been permitted to defend the lady with the title of Golden, an honor which had earned him the envy of many. He rose early, always before the sun rose. When he realized his consciousness had emerged from a faraway world of darkness, his mind cleared up immediately, and his body was almost fully operational. Climb was proud of his ability to sleep and rise quickly. His eyes opened wide, and an iron will burned within him. He peeled away the thick towel covering his body. It was summer, but the nights were cold when one was surrounded by stone, and Climb sat up on his bed. He touched his fingertips to the corner of his eyes. They came away wet. That dream again, huh? Climb wiped his tears away with his sleeves. The heavy rain of 2 or 3 days ago must have made him recall that memory of his youth. He was not crying out of heartbreak. How many people could one meet in a lifetime and who deserved respect? How many worthy masters could one serve, the kind for whom one would gladly throw one's life away? On that day, when Climb had the good fortune of encountering a certain lady, he had decided to give his life for her at any time. The tears he shed came from joy. He wept out of gratitude for the miracle that encounter had brought. Climb's youthful face was filled with a steady determination as he rose to his feet. There was no illumination here. In this lightless world, Climb spoke, in a voice that was hoarse from overtrawling. Lights on. The lamp on the ceiling shed white illumination in response to Climb's command word, lighting up the room's interior. This was a magic item enchanted with the continual light spell. While items like these could be bought on the market, they were not cheap, and Climb only possessed one due to his unique position. Stone towers like these had poor ventilation, and burning things for illumination was not safe. Therefore, almost every room here was furnished with magical illumination, despite the steep initial expense. The white light revealed that the floors and walls were also made of stone. Several thin carpets were laid on the ground to lessen the cold hardness of the stone. In addition, there was a crudely made wooden bed, and a slightly larger clothes cabinet that seemed big enough to store his war gear. There was a desk with drawers, and then a wooden chair with a thin cushion on its seat. An outsider might consider this austere, but it was more than he deserved, in his opinion. Regular soldiers would not be allocated individual rooms. They would share double bunks and live in groups. The only other furniture they were assigned besides their beds was a locked wooden chest for storing personal items. He then glanced at the pure white suit of full plate armor in the corner of the room. It was so lustrous that it seemed to shine by itself. A standard soldier would never be issued such an exquisitely made suit of armor. Naturally, Climb had not earned such special treatment through his own merits. This was a gift from the liege to whom Climb owed his loyalty. Thus, it was unavoidable that others would resent him. He opened the dressing cabinet, and took clothes from within. Then he dressed himself as he watched his image in the cabinet's mirror. First, he put on an old set of clothes. They smelled of metal, no matter how many times he washed them. Then he slipped a chain shirt over it. Normally, he would have donned his armor on top of that, but there was no need to be so formal right now. In its place, he wore a many-pocketed vest and a pair of pants, and then he was dressed. He held a bucket with a cloth in it. After that, he studied the mirror once more, inspecting himself for anything out of place or any oddities in his personal bearing. Any mistakes Climb made would be fodder for attacks launched against the golden princess whom he served. Therefore, he had to be extra careful. He did not live in this place to cause trouble to his mistress. He was permitted to live here in order for himself to dedicate everything he had to her. Climb closed his eyes before the mirror, and imagined his mistress' face. She was the golden princess Rena, their Chidalon royal self. As expected of her high-born bloodline, she was surrounded in a sacrosanct aura, like a goddess descending upon the earth. She seemed to glow with compassion, and her mind produced many wise plans and policies. She was a noble among nobles, a princess among princesses. She was the perfect woman. Her golden brilliance, like an immaculate gemstone, could not be marred in any way. If one were to use a ring for comparison, Rena would be like a huge brilliant cut diamond. As for Climb, he would be the setting which held the stone in place. Any shortcoming in the setting diminished the value of the ring, so he could not do anything which might devalue her. Climb's chest burned uncontrollably as he thought about his mistress. Even the most pious supplicants to the gods could not compare to Climb's devotion. He examined himself for a while longer. After he was certain that he would not disgrace his mistress, Climb nodded in satisfaction and left the room.